Hi, Gino Borges here to review Danny Boyle's newest movie, 127 Hours from a Wild Self Perspective. Danny Boyle is the director of Slumdog Millionaire. 127 Hours is very comparable to the movie Into the Wild. You might remember that story. Sean Penn directed the movie. Emil Hirsch played Chris McCandless, who went on a journey through the States and then eventually ended up in Alaska. Very similar in spirit and tenor in terms of both of them involve this hero's journey, the self-reliance, wanting to go out in the wild, the wide open space, to feel alive, to actually discover a part of themselves that they feel has either been slumbering or haven't been able to find. In 127 Hours, it opens up with a great scene, very similar to Slumdog Millionaire, which has a wonderful opening scene, where Boyle establishes this intense societal element that Ralston's sort of running away from. And he does it by cutting and splicing a bunch of scenes together that involve showing throngs of people, thousands upon thousands of people, and then intercutting it with Ralston packing up his stuff to go out to Moab. And what you do is you see this one person that's just racing to get away from these particular elements. And then when Ralston, the character, makes it out to Moab, he ends up meeting a few women along the way, adventures with them, swims, climbs, bikes, and then eventually sets himself apart and says, I must go on my own. And within like 10 to 15 minutes of the movie, and maybe 20 minutes of the movie, all of a sudden Ralston finds himself in a canyon, small tight canyon, and that he tried to climb into, and a rock that he used to grab onto actually falls on him, I should say falls on his arm, and catches his right arm. And this is where the challenge of the ultimate challenge that must have come from, or that Boyle must encounter, because the challenge was now all of a sudden we have an hour of film story left, but my character, or his character, is stuck in one spot. How do you create that sense of adventure? And what I noticed was two particular themes. One is that you had the adventure of showing the unfolding of the different survival techniques, whether it was trying to cut the rock or trying to move the rock with the climbing rope that he had. He tried all these different techniques. And throughout this 100 plus excuse me, this 100 plus hours, what you do is you saw somebody really, when we're in our primal state, you become really savvy. You start using things in ways that you would have never used them before. The other element that he uses is a psychic storyline as well, where all of a sudden he goes from being really mad, or I should say like frustrated and sad, to actually started to think he was hallucinating and seeing things. And one of the greatest scenes from my perspective in the movie was a scene where he thought he heard something behind him while he was stuck in the rock. He took his camera, turned around really quickly, took the picture, came back and checked it, and realized, wow, that was all in his head. And eventually those two things are cut back and forth, so you go from that sort of that hallucinating state and a memory recall state, which was part of the psychic sort of story, where he goes back and reminisces about his family, his girlfriend, and so forth. And they're cutting back and forth between the survival aspect and then him in his resting position, and him going back and reminiscing, and him hearing things. Eventually he has to cut his arm off because he realizes that's pretty much the only option that he has, after he learns that he needs to break his bone to actually get in there to cut it off. And within an hour and a half period of time, the movie moves very well. And I think that was Boyle's ultimate challenge in this movie, and that was what I was curious about. I said, what, they're going to show somebody in a hole for the bulk of the movie? But when all of a sudden you're sitting there and you realize, like, wow, we just got into this movie and he's stuck, you realize, like, the story is right there. The story is what happens in that particular hole. So, I mean, if you're interested in adventure movies, the hero's journey, this will to survive, and this wide open, and just the draw of the wide open space, and that chasm between society and solitude and so forth, give it a shot. You'll also learn that both of them come to similar conclusions, that all this self-reliance stuff is all cool until you have that moment where you actually need somebody. And that's going to be part 2 of my review, where I talk about this idea that always let somebody know where you're going.